there's a real split in U.S. literature between between commercial literature, novels like that Crichton writes, Stephen King, Tom Clancy, who are the other big, Grisham, the law guy, some of which are really pretty good, and they make a great deal of money, and there's a whole lot of demand for them. And then there is still, and I think it's probably like this well, it's probably not quite. There's probably more demand for serious books in Europe, but here there's a small pocket of probably, I don't know, 500,000, say 1 million readers who, many of whom are from the upper classes and have good educations and have been taught the pleasures of hard work in reading or music or art, and like that. I mean, when you're talking to me, you're talking to somebody who doesn't have very much power in the culture and who's not very important except in a fairly small, I don't know what the analog would be. It would be something like maybe contemporary classical music in the U.S., which there are people who enjoy it and listen to it, partly because of training and partly because they're disposed to be willing to do a certain amount more work reading it. But compared to popular music and rock and roll and hip hop and stuff, classical music is nothing. I mean, economically or commercially, or in terms of how many people have heard of it, or how much an influence it has on the culture. And for me personally, I don't know that it's really ever been all that different. I think probably American education used to be a little bit better and a little bit more difficult, and children had no choice but to realize that there were certain things that were hard and involved a certain amount of drudgery that were actually very satisfying at the end of it. But for the most part, I think in the U.S., people who've been doing, quote, serious stuff, which is harder and stranger, have always played to a much smaller audience. Reading requires sitting alone by yourself in a quiet room, and I have friends, intelligent friends, who don't like to read because it's not just bored. There's an almost dread that comes up, I think, here, about having to be alone and having to be quiet, and you see that when you walk in. When you walk into most public spaces in America, it isn't quiet anymore. They pipe music through, and the music's easy to make fun of because it's usually really horrible music. But it seems significant that we don't want things to be quiet ever anymore. And to me, I don't know that I could defend it, but that seems to me to have something to do with when you feel like the purpose of your life is to gratify yourself and get things for yourself and go all the time. There's this other part of you that's the same part that can kind of is almost hungry for silence and quiet and thinking really hard about the same thing for maybe half an hour instead of 30 seconds, that doesn't get fed at all. And it makes itself felt in the body in a kind of dread in here. And I don't know whether that makes a whole lot of sense, but I think it's true that here in the U.S. every year the culture gets more and more hostile. And I don't mean hostile like angry, just it becomes more and more difficult to ask people to read or to look at a piece of art for an hour, or to listen to a piece of music that's complicated and that takes work to understand, because, well, there are a lot of reasons, but particularly now in computer and internet culture, everything is so fast, and the faster things go, the more we feed that part of ourselves, but don't feed the part of ourselves that likes quiet, that can live in quiet, that can live without any kind of stimulation.